Midterm Budget 2017, indeed. All eyes are going to be on Parliament this afternoon when our Finance Minister, Malusi Gigaba, does his inaugural medium-term budget speech. Now, let me tell you something. This has to be one of the most difficult budgets that anybody's had to deliver, never mind a maiden budget for our Finance Minister. You have got junk status hanging over South Africa's head. We've been downgraded by two ratings agencies, that, of course, S&P and Fitch. They're watching very closely for political stability, and as things have been lately, political stability is something that South Africa doesn't really have. But the reality of the situation is that there is slow economic growth, there's a gaping tax hole, there's the issue of trying to rescue SOEs. We've got Eskom, we've got Transnet, we've got the SABC, you name it. There is so much for our Finance Minister to balance here. Devan Murugan is our reporter covering that story for us. Devan, I don't think I'm exaggerating when saying this must be one of the most difficult budgets or mini budgets that South Africa has faced, and the responsibility on Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba for this to be his maiden budget is massive.
Yes, thanks indeed, Leanne. Good morning to you. It's exactly that. You pretty much summed it up. There's such a cloud hanging over this budget and the Finance Minister for those very reasons you pointed out. We've got weak economic growth, hovering around 0.5% this year. That is not nearly enough to create the much needed jobs. We've got a huge budget deficit on our hands, and that's the difference between the money we collect in terms of tax revenue versus what we actually spend. That gap is widening. It was 3.5% in the beginning of the year, forecast-wise. It's now looking at something around 4% or perhaps even above that. Now, the big question is, where do we get the money to do this? Well, let's try and answer that question. I've got Maudi Latswane from Lahuma Investments who joins us now. Maudi, this question of the budget deficit, I mean, essentially it means the amount of money we collect versus what we spend. We're in a bit of a gap. It's wide. Out of everything that people would be watching, it's that deficit that's probably the most hovering and hanging in the balance issue here, isn't it?
You summed it up very well. It's a big cloud hanging. That gap needs to be closed. And unfortunately, when you've got the economy that's just not growing, at a fraction of 1%, we're certainly going to just see that gap widening even further. So we're not collecting enough revenue. Even if you increase the taxes, the fact of the matter is the contributions are still going to be significantly lower because the economy is not creating enough jobs for the people to be able to be, to contribute into the fiscus. So that's the big challenge the minister will have to answer today. There's in a number of ways, but it's not going to be a nice budget. It's going to be a painful one.
Okay. So let's just take a look at the options here. One, you can cut spending, government spending. Yes. Two, you can raise taxes, introduce new taxes. You can borrow. Or at the end of the day, if you go back to taxes, you can just work on your efficiency. So there are very limited options. Yeah. How he plays around with those options is basically what people will be looking at this afternoon.
And that's exactly the balancing act that we're talking about. Because when you're raising taxes and you've got the economy that's not growing, raising taxes, you are further putting pressure on the economy. So you're, in a way, undoing what you are supposed to really be doing, which is grow the economy. By raising taxes, yes, you will collect a little bit there, but its impact on the economy, it's negative. And also, I think what remains, it's on the spending side. We need to rein in on that spending. Now sitting around almost 50% of our budget. And when you look at, the big elephant in the room, it's the wage bill. The massive wage bill that the government, public sector wage bill that we have, it's a huge problem, and it continues to increase, and it's at an unsustainable level. So, number of things we're going to be looking closely to see that all those measures that they previously communicated, which is cutting all this unnecessary spending, are they working? Also, what sort of methods are they going to be implementing to ensure that they rein in on that public sector wage bill?
Also hovering around that is the entire issue of state-owned enterprises and the guarantees that government associates with them. Now let's look at some of the figures here. 480 billion rand in guarantees for state-owned enterprises. The chunk of that is associated with Eskom, 350 billion rand. And then, of course, we've got this very, very contentious subject of South African Airways. We're waiting to see where he's going to get the money from to actually keep this airline going. What's your predictions there? I mean, it's not just economic stakeholders that are looking at us, it's ratings agencies as well. So as far as SAA is concerned, that's the big one. What do you think will happen this afternoon?
I think with regards to SAA, I'm encouraged by the fact that we've already seen some movements in terms of the change of the management. You know, we've had a number of years after years of SAA losing a lot of money under the leadership of that board. So the board had to do the reforms on the board. That's number one. Get new management. After getting new management, then get to give them guidelines in terms of, not guidelines, but I mean hold them to account in terms of how they spend the money and how they perform at these state-owned enterprises. We can no longer continue to go back and fetch from the fiscus and help these state-owned enterprises. They need to self-sustain, and if they self-sustain and begin to make more money, they can then begin to attract even some private capital and not have to rely on the state to bail them out. That's the big challenge.
So in other words, it's not just about providing money for SAA, but providing an environment where the finance minister this afternoon demonstrates that money will be used in a productive manner. Maru, we also have the situation of a trust deficit. Now, in order to get this economy going, we need investors to come here, put money, but they have to have trust that the economy will have some certainty going forward. Businesses will be watching this very, very closely. We've seen in April that business confidence plunging when that cabinet reshuffle happened. What does the finance minister have to do today to secure an ounce of credibility?
Yeah, so, confidence, it's one very important aspect and one important element that it's difficult to even measure. But it's one crucial factor into ensuring that the economy performs well. If there's no confidence, nobody's going to come in and invest in this country. So one of the things that have impacted negatively on confidence this year has been politics, and also around the issues, by and large, the politics, and also the state-owned enterprises, the losses that we've seen. Those things need to be corrected. So number one, Malusi Gigaba has got no control over the politics of the day. Today is not about politics. But I think today it's about his ability to demonstrate that he can hold those state-owned enterprises, the leakages that we've seen there, to stop. And in terms of how he's going to stop those wasteful expenditures at those state-owned enterprises, he's given them an additional 5 billion rand a couple of weeks ago, with no conditions whatsoever. So we want to know what's going to happen with the next tranches that he perhaps going to be giving them. Is it going to come at harsh conditions, and what those conditions will be? That's what we'll be waiting to hear.
All right, so undoubtedly state-owned enterprise is a big focus this afternoon at the budget. So that's where we leave it for now. It's back to studio in Johannesburg. We'll have more on this midterm budget speech later in the morning.